This is Catherine Schneider from the Fitchburg Historical Society, and we do our monthly interviews with people from the community and businesses and government and so on. Today, we are very happy to welcome Jessie Shiveler, and she is the Community Grief Manager at Agrace Grief Support Center. So we want to welcome her and thank her for being with us today. And we're going to learn a lot about the Grief Center from Jessie. And the first thing I think I'd like to ask you, Jessie, is would you begin just by letting us know the location and then the hours of the Agrace Grief Support Center in Fitchburg?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Catherine. I'm really glad to be here. Our address is 2906 Marketplace Drive. And we don't have business hours per se. It's basically by appointment. So when we have appointments or groups, our doors are open. We do a lot of work out in the community, so sometimes no one is here. And I'd hate for somebody to stop by and be met with a locked door. So the best thing to do is to call us ahead of time just to make sure that there's going to be someone here. And I'm happy to share our phone number. It's 608-327-7110. But we love to show our space to people. So I encourage people to reach out to come see where we are and what we do.
Great. Thanks, Jessie, for that introduction. Yeah. And then since we are in Historical Society, we'd like to ask you about the history of the Grief Support Center, how long it's existed and what brought it about.
Absolutely. I love this question. So we have been in this location for about 5.5 years. We rent our space and we moved in the summer of 2017. And Agrace has always provided grief support, but as we got bigger and we were serving more people, we realized that we didn't really have ample space to provide the type of grief support that we wanted to provide, especially for children. Of course, our inpatient unit in Fitchburg is beautiful, but it wasn't necessarily designed with grieving people in mind as far as space to provide grief support. And so we did what we could in that space and eventually decided to start looking for a separate building that we could house our grief support. One of the other things that we realized, in addition to needing more space for kids, was that for some people, it's really hard to walk into a hospice facility. And so we wanted to provide an equally beautiful space, but one that was really just focused on supporting people that were missing someone. So we looked around for a while. We found a space that we thought would meet our needs. And so we've been here for about 5.5 years. And I feel like we've finally kind of settled in and we've got our groove down and are really just able to provide the type of support that we want to.
Oh, thank you. And I have toured the facility and it is gorgeous.
Thank you.
And so welcoming also. So you're so welcome. Thank you for providing it for the community. And what needs does the Grief Center address for the Fitchburg community? And then I'm sure beyond too.
Yes, that's true. We provide grief support across all of our service area, which of course includes outside of Fitchburg. I think that for some people, being able to walk in a building that actually has the word grief as part of its name is really validating. To know that grief is so important and such a common experience that we've created a space just for that, I think in and of itself says a lot. So we wanted a space where people could talk about the really messy aspects of grief and not feel like they needed to pretend that it wasn't as hard as it is. So I think that what we do is provide that safe, welcoming space where people can come as they are with whatever emotions that may be, and they'll be they'll be greeted with an openness and a willingness to let them express what they need to express. And I don't think there's a lot of places like that people can feel that sense of safety and welcoming with some of the messier emotions that us humans have. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the biggest piece of what we offer.
Mm-hmm. Those emotions that sometimes get hidden or are not accepted or do not feel acceptable, that you have the space for that to happen.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, Jessie, to ask you, how have people dealt with grief historically? What's gone on with people in the past before they had a center such as we have the good fortune to have in Fitchburg, mm-hmm. and then what's the uniqueness maybe of the grief center in assisting people with the loss of their loved ones?
Sure. I think grief is such a unique experience, and it depends on so many different factors. It depends on how we were raised and what our beliefs are and where we grew up and all sorts of different things. But I think for many people, grief was taboo. It wasn't something that was necessarily talked about. Maybe not talked about publicly, maybe not talked about even in the house where they grew up. And when you don't talk about those things, you don't understand what common reactions are. You don't understand that it's normal to feel guilty, for example. And so I think when we're not talking about it as a society, there's a lot of isolation in grief because you don't know that what you're experiencing, other people are also experiencing. And I think that's one piece of what the Grief Center does is bring people together. And there's, you can almost see people exhale when they come to one of our groups because they just know they're with people who get it. And even if the experiences aren't identical, because they're never identical, but there's enough commonalities in grief generally that just knowing that you can have that time to talk about the tough parts, to talk about the beauty that maybe has been found in grief as well. It's all welcome here. So I think that just that permission to talk about it and to acknowledge it is a lot different for many people. I think one of the other unique things about this space is that we support anybody who's grieving. So while we're affiliated with Agrace Hospice, the people that we support don't have to have had a connection to Agrace in the past. And I think that's a hurdle that we're trying to overcome because people assume that because it's the Agrace Grief Support Center, that the person that died had to have had hospice at the end of their life. But we also support people whose loved ones didn't have hospice services. And so I think that's a unique aspect of our center too, is that we truly are available for anybody who'd like the support.
That's wonderful to make yourselves available. So it's really a matter of people knowing this and realizing that it stands by itself and of itself, the Grief Center, so that people can feel free to access the services that are there with their grieving needs.
Yeah.
Which brings me to my next question, which is to have you describe the range of services that you do offer through the Grief Support Center.
Yes. So there's a few different services that we provide. We provide individual support So we can support people short term. So we provide up to 4 individual visits. And that can take place in person at our grief center or virtually. We're happy to support people virtually as well. We also provide grief groups. And each year we probably do, maybe 15 different grief groups during the year. We have our standard groups that we offer, but then we also try to do some research and find out what's already being offered in the community, and maybe where are there gaps? Is there a certain population or a certain group of people that aren't really finding the support that they need? So, for example, this year we're going to do a monthly young adult group. So for people from 18 to 30-ish, we found that there's not a lot of options out there for people that fall into that age range. In the past, we've also done a suicide survivors group, so people whose loved ones died by suicide. We did a Spanish-speaking group about 1.5 years ago. So trying, again, to find out what are the needs and can we meet them. In addition to that, we also do in-services or presentations. So if there's an organization that would like us to come in and do a presentation on grief, or how to support grieving employees if it's a business, we are happy to provide that as well. And the other big part of what we do is we have really great connections to area school districts. And we go into schools and do grief groups in the schools. And we can also provide individual support in the schools. So we're busy providing services, but it's so rewarding, especially when we're able to connect with people that might not be aware of our services, or maybe not able to utilize our services otherwise. So I think I captured it all. Those are the main things that we do to help support the community.
What strikes me, Jessie, is that not only do you provide for individuals and groups, but you're also out in the community, and you are also researching where the needs are and trying to provide for those. So really your foresight in looking at what is also needed is an important aspect of your work too. So really a range of services that you provide to many different groups, and going into the schools, for instance, when there's perhaps some needs there, businesses, etc. Very comprehensive, because grief is comprehensive and found and
that's
found
right
everywhere, isn't it?
That's right. Exactly.
Well, how have your programs and services maybe evolved since you did open your doors? I know you're relatively new, with just 5.5 years being open, but even in that time, I would suspect you might have had some evolving of your services, and then maybe looking at the future and what the trends are looking like for you at this point in offering grief support for people.
Sure. You know, when I was thinking about how we've evolved, of course, I think of COVID, and I think of how everybody quickly learned how to provide support virtually. And so that's definitely one of the things that has come out of the past couple of years for us in particular, is our comfort level and our ability to provide virtual grief support. So we can support people outside of Wisconsin. So that's a wonderful thing that we can do. Other ways that we've evolved, I think, is what you kind of hit on before, with paying attention to what's going on in our communities and where the needs are. We're also lucky enough to live in a community that does have some pretty great resources out there. And so we certainly don't want to duplicate, but there's plenty of grief to go around. So if there's something that's not being met by somebody else, and we have the ability to offer it, I think we've been pretty good at offering those things and supporting communities that might have been overlooked before. And as we move forward, I think continuing to pay attention, continuing to identify where the needs are, getting creative with how we're doing that. There's a lot of alternative ways to provide grief support, different things that we could offer besides one-on-ones and groups. We did a walking grief group during COVID so that we could be outside. But we're also looking into things like yoga for grief or Tai Chi for grief, things like that maybe somebody would be more interested in something like that than maybe a grief group. So, just taking some risks and trying to offer things that might connect with people that haven't found our current offerings to be what they needed. So I think looking forward, just trying those new things and being open to give things a try for the first time.
Mm-hmm. I think that when you talked about things like movement, yoga,
Yes.
processing grief in that way through your body,
Yes.
not just perhaps thinking of talking, and I suspect children, you certainly have a lot of experience with children and grief, perhaps some of that being worked out through things like movement or art or the play, the way children work.
Absolutely. Yes. So getting creative and we need to learn too. We need to keep up to date on what the different options are and what's available. So that's definitely something that's part of our future as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, it brings me to ask the question about your staff and your volunteers. I know you have both the staff and volunteers who come in to help at the Grief Center. So can you tell us maybe a little bit about the background that people bring or training for your staff and volunteers?
Absolutely. I refer to our team as small and mighty. There's a handful of us. There's 5 of us that work out of the Grief Support Center. And I'm really pleased to share that last fall we hired a bilingual staff person. So we now have somebody who can offer support to people that speak Spanish, which is wonderful. Varying backgrounds. We have some people with social work backgrounds. We have someone with a child life specialist background. So I have an education background. I was a school counselor for a few years. So we all bring our own unique sort of experience and interest. So we provide, in my mind, expert grief support to a lot of different people, and we can do that based on our various backgrounds. We all bring something a little bit different. Mm-hmm. And our volunteers, oh my gosh, our volunteers. I always tease them that we couldn't do this without them. And it's not hyperbole, it's the absolute truth that we could not do our work without them. So we have volunteers that co-facilitate all of our grief groups. So they are actively leading our grief groups with our staff. And then one group that I realized I neglected to mention was our family program, which is a grief group for adults and school-aged children. And for that group, we really want to have one volunteer for every child that's in attendance. And so we often have 7 or 8 volunteers at a time when that program is taking place. And so they really supplement the work that we do to help us support as many people as we can. And they come with lots of different backgrounds as well. We have some volunteers who are students at a local college or university. We have some that are teachers or former teachers. We have some that are interested in pursuing a nursing degree or becoming a doctor. And we have some that have no sort of background that you might think of as far as providing grief support. They just want to help the community. And so all different experiences, all different backgrounds, as long as people are willing to learn about grief and able to be comfortable kind of getting in the thick of it with people. We just value our volunteers so much. They just add such a richness to what we're able to provide.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like you have just marvelous staff and volunteers that support one another too, because that's also important in some of the heavy work that you do in grief support, that you have one another there too for each other. Well, and if I may ask a personal question of you, Jessie,
Sure.
what brought you to this work? It certainly is a unique role that you have, and why you chose it, how you happened to end up at the Grief Support Center.
I wish I had a better story for you. I actually started with Agrace in 2000 when they opened the main office on East Sherrill Parkway. And I started as a unit assistant in an administrative role. I knew somebody that worked at Agrace, and they said that they were opening this inpatient unit and needed some help. I was in school. I was in school for school counseling to get my master's. And what I realized in my years as a unit assistant was that I kind of had a knack that I didn't know I had. I was comfortable with people that were grieving. I especially felt drawn to connecting with kids that were grieving. And so it was just one of those things that I didn't know I was interested in until I was in the middle of it. And so then 21, 22 years later, I'm still here. So yeah, kind of a different story. But I don't know what else I would be doing. I just feel like this is the role that I was supposed to be part of, the agency I was supposed to be part of. So that's my Agrace story.
Well, it speaks to your commitment and your obvious gifts in that direction, Jessie, that you have been with Agrace so long and have been drawn to it and remain even the hard work that goes with it, and the need to be really present to people during their grief, and the children. Well, one last question for you, and just very simple and practical, which is, what is the best way for people to contact you with questions? They have further questions, and then to access your services. And I know you gave us your telephone number at the beginning. If there's anything else you'd like to add, or maybe even repeating that phone number, would be wonderful for people to access your services that are so needed.
Yes, absolutely. Our phone number again is 608-327-7110. Our email address is griefsupport@agrace.org. And then our website, which has all the up-to-date information on the groups. We also have resources on our website, and that is agrace.org/grief support. And like I said before, we love to share our space with the community, whether that's an individual or if there's, a civic organization or a group of people that want to come and tour our space at some time, please reach out. We would love to make that happen. So I encourage people to connect with us.
Great. And having been there, it is such a welcoming space. space to feel very comfortable and at home. It's almost like entering your own home space. So thank you, Jessie. And I think making the information about the Grief Center more available, to continuing to do that for the public, and then commendations on the way you're reaching out and looking at the needs that are there, and your willingness to be creative, look at what could be done, to experiment, as well as remain grounded in the things work well. So kudos, kudos to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That means a lot. Really appreciate that, and appreciate the opportunity to help spread the word about what we do and how we might be able to help people.
Grief is a universal experience, and to
That's
know
right.
the center is here is what a wonderful gift to have to the community. And I will just let people know again about the Fitchburg Historical Society too, because we also can be reached for people history of Fitchburg, including things like the Agrace the Grief Support Center, which is relatively new to the community, but part of our history now. It has been here for 5.5 years. So information about Fitchburg Historical Society on our website can be accessed at any point. So it's fitchburghistory.org. We're also on Facebook. So we also appreciate hearing from people and getting to tell the story of Fitchburg and what a wonderful community we have to be a part of. So Jessie, thank you again for being our guest today, and much luck as you walk into the future too with your with what you have to offer, the needs that are in the community for grief support. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.